couple statistics I saw over the last couple of weeks. Wanted to get your take on specifically the U.S. automakers. Jack Ewing, a New York Times columnist, wrote an article last week about the Canada and China trade deal, and he called out that only 8% of GM's Q3 2025, if I'm not mistaken, global revenues came from outside of Mexico, the United States, and Canada. The next statistic I'll throw at you is that retail sales of Ford Chang'an, which is Ford's joint venture in China with Chang'an Motor, was less than 100,000 units in 2025 total on a base of 24 million units in 2025 for the China market. So give me your thoughts on those two crazy numbers.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think both. Let's start with General Motors. I mean, General Motors, from a profit and revenue standpoint, as you pointed out, is essentially a North American regional car company. And yes, they have operations and sales outside of North America, and they have a China operation that's still reasonably significant, but it's not anywhere near as large as it used to be, and it doesn't return anything like the profit that it used to return. It's still there and it's meaningful. So they're not. I mean, I think it's a little unfair to say they're totally just a regional car company, but fundamentally they're a North American car company, which is why I think Mary Barra was quoted as expressing concern about this Canada China deal, which would allow 50,000 EV Chinese made vehicles into the Canadian market on sort of a test basis. That's not good news for GM. Ford still has a fairly significant European operation, but they seem to be focusing it more and more on commercial vehicles because that's still a profitable segment. Yeah, still a profitable segment for them in Europe, but the consumer vehicle market is getting tougher and tougher. Again, Chinese competition is in there. The local car companies, Renault, Volkswagen, haven't died and gone away. In fact, if anything, Renault is showing some signs of resurgence, which is inconvenient because somebody needs to pack up and go home in the European market for the rest, to let the rest of the players.
A few.
Yeah. It's always the other guy who should rationalize capacity and get out of the way. So that the rest of us can make some money.
You could argue that Renault is for France's national brand.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Stellantis, kind of has, not kind of. Stellantis is also a French company in many ways. I mean, they're sort of, they have Fiat, which is Italy's national champion, and Peugeot, which is a national champion in France.
And they have Citroën.
So, look, I mean, there's two car companies that could reasonably call France home and be their national champion. It's probably one company too many if you're being rigorous about it from a capacity and profits point of view. But look, back to the point about Ford and GM. Yes, I think both of these companies, from a profitability point of view, both of those companies are now basically regional North American car companies, or they're not even car companies; they're truck companies. They're North American truck companies, pickup truck companies.
That's a good point.
And that is the business that sustains them, and that is the business that they are really in. And I think you'll see both companies working very hard, particularly when it comes to trade policy, to make sure, and environmental regulatory policy, to make sure that those franchises are not put in harm's way. I mean, that's just the way it is. That's how they survive.
Could you ever see a scenario as drastic as this sounds today on February 3rd, 2026, that GM and Ford could merge because the situation becomes so dire for them?
So, I mean, a lot of people know that was contemplated during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. There was, I'm not sure if it was GM that reached out to Ford. I think it was. And certainly the Obama folks, the automotive team that President Obama put together to run the auto bailouts, they certainly looked at that, and they also looked at
the auto czar. What was his name? I forget his name, but anyways.
Yeah, me too. There's a couple of them, but I think Steve Ratner was one, and
yes, Ratner. Yep.
Yeah,
that's him.
They also, honestly, and again, this is a matter of record. I mean, they also looked at whether they should even bother bailing out the former Chrysler, now part of Stellantis. Whether that was even made any sense. And I think one of the reasons they did engineer the sale to Fiat Chrysler, or to Fiat rather, Sergio Marchionne, was that they recognized that if you consolidated any one of the Motor City 3 into a fully into a Motor City 2, thousands of people would lose their jobs. And that was not on the agenda for the Obama administration. I doubt it would be on the agenda for the Trump administration. If it happens because we go into another recession, real recession, not sort of the psychological recession that we were talking about earlier, could that happen? I mean, yeah, I suppose, but you look around at the global auto industry, and we could spend a whole podcast going back and forth about how many car companies ought to be consolidated into another company so that you have one half decent rational car company as opposed to two companies that are floundering around. I'll just say one word: Nissan. But it hasn't happened because these companies, they're too big, they're too politically salient, they have too many people, and it's just very difficult to see that.
And it would create a domino effect, to be quite frank, amongst other OEMs, but also on the tier ones to tier fours. A Nissan takes out, there's still a couple of million units of sales. Okay. So that's meaningful business to a lot of tier ones. The last thing I want to get your thoughts on before we end the show is the rumors from the Financial Times about Ford, BYD, and or Xiaomi talking. They have vehemently denied that, but as a journalist, as a very, very thorough journalist, have you run into vehement denials in past articles that you've written? And how would you read this?
Oh goodness!
Because I look at it this way, Joe.
What is going on?
It's there.
Hold on a second. My phone is ringing. I forgot that it rings on my computer too. So
hold on. I believe it's their fiduciary duty to create these conversations, whether they do anything or not.
So we used to. This kind of thing always drove me crazy when I was, working at Reuters or the Wall Street Journal, and a story like this would pop up, in a competing publication, and you'd spend all this time chasing it. This is one of those things that it appears not to be true, at least as framed, but it has legs because it kind of should be true, right? It may not be true, but it should be true, or it could be true. Could it be true that Jim Farley, who has expressed considerable respect and admiration for Xiaomi's car or cars, he got one and drove it around the United States. He said he didn't want to give it away or give it back. He's stood up a whole operation at Ford that's designed to try to replicate Xiaomi's product development and technology processes. So you look at that and say, well, gosh, why wouldn't he? Well, has Ford people talked to or benchmarked or tried to gain intelligence from Xiaomi? Probably. Would they want to do a full-on partnership with Xiaomi? Well, again, maybe, but we know, that and Ford has, Ford had a partnership or not with CATL, the Chinese battery company, to build a factory here in Michigan, and they got torpedoed by mostly Republicans.
And then they wanted to expand their BYD partnership.
Yeah. And so I think the political and kind of the geopolitical or political animus against any kind of tie-ups with Chinese companies is very strong. I mean, we've talked about this. We certainly heard it, in connection with Canada's, trade deal and all of this stuff. So I think, I did see the Ford denial, and when I saw a denial like, when I saw a denial like this is completely false. That probably means it's not true. we don't talk about when something like this comes out, and the companies, the honest response should be, yeah, we are talking to them, but you don't want to say that. What you say instead is, look, we talk to people all the time, and we don't discuss those conversations, or we have no comment on rumors and speculation. That's what you say, because at least in the corporate world, telling flat out lies is not acceptable, kind of on a person to person basis. But also, at some point, you can't tell lies to the investor community. It's just not really good.
So you don't think this could have been a trial balloon?
I mean, it's so. I have a lot of respect for the FT. They're not a frivolous organization. I'm sure that whoever wrote that story, I don't know who it was. I'm sure that whoever wrote that story didn't just make it up. Somebody told them that this was happening, maybe more than one somebody, but it could have been.
They said 4 sources confirmed.
Yeah. Okay. So it's quite possible that one, that these conversations took place, but from a Ford perspective, they were not aimed at a formal partnership or alliance, like with paperwork, but were more along the lines of, hey, could we, we really love to learn more about what you do, or something, something less formal, or more, more preliminary and exploratory, which allows Ford to say it's false that we are about to forge a formal alliance. But so, and the other thing is that, look, bankers and people, who want something to happen and want something to be true, we'll talk about it. And sometimes and I've had this happen in my own case, where you're in a conversation and you lose track of whether we are speculating, right, or whether we're talking about something that's actually happened. And
now we sound like a president.
Yeah. I mean,
I can't think of his name, but now we sound like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that guy. So look, I think the FT reported this in good faith. I think they did it, and they said they had 4 sources. I believe they had 4 sources. I don't think they make stuff up. I do think it's possible for a reporter to be, to either misinterpret something, or to be told something by an interested party who wants a certain thing to be true, or wants to float a trial balloon to see how it would go, and be used in that way. And it's not like that never happened to me. Okay, I mean, I've written stories where I subsequently realized, oh gosh, I was being used to, as part of,
for messaging,
as a chessboard, or as a messenger.
Yeah.
And sometimes I knew that. I mean, one story in particular, where I was called in for an interview with a fairly senior executive of GM, and I can't remember if it was on or off the record, so I won't say who wanted to send a message to an overseas partner about just how unhappy General Motors management was with that partner's behavior, or the behavior of that partner's kind of ecosystem. I got a whole interview about this and dutifully wrote the story, and then I realized, this wasn't news. This was me being used as a telegraph operator. Like, fine, still a decent. I mean, people were really unhappy. people were really disgruntled with each other. So it wasn't like so. But I do think that look, I'll say one last thing about this. I go back to this point. Should Ford have an alliance with Xiaomi if the goal is, to go to, and I'll throw this to you. Should Ford have an alliance with Xiaomi in order to get access to the technology and the technology processes that Xiaomi uses, and apparently uses to pretty effectively? Should they? Would that be a good thing for Ford?
Oh yes, without question. Let me round this conversation out. I know the FT guys pretty well. In Asia, in the United States, in Europe, I don't know them to be very frivolous either. I think they're a really, really, really good media outlet. And number one, number two, I got contacted by multiple media outlets about this story. I couldn't confirm anything, so didn't really have any comments. So it wasn't just FT that was chasing this down. The other thing is, it to me it's credible because BYD and Ford already do business. So to say, hey, let's just have a conversation about X, since we're already here meeting about Y. So that to me is not a stretch. And the second thing, to your point, Xiaomi, their automotive division is less than 5 years old. It has sold 400,000 cars, two products in the last year. They're probably going to get to 600,000, and they're the belle of the ball. And they've been consistently the belle of the ball over the last 2 years that they've been selling product, despite a price war, despite new products coming out 6 to 10 months. So there has to be envy. I would be envious because, and the other thing that's really important in China, their car starts at $35,000, and it's something that they could easily sell for 60, 65. Maybe not in the China market, but definitely in Europe and the United States. And there would be room, and there would still be room. So and to your point, Farley has been effusive of his praise, okay, of the Xiaomi SU7, and so. But again, I look at it like Stellantis should not be part of this conversation, because it needs to be a GM and Ford how they become competitive globally. And because Stellantis owns 20% or 19% of Leap Motor. So right then and there, that creates an opportunity for Leap Motor to build in Canada at that facility that's not building anything in Brampton or Windsor or something like that. Okay, so that creates an immediate opportunity. And again, this is why Mary said we are very concerned about that, because if we're playing 3D chess, I don't want to get into it too much, but the equation has changed in just the last 3 or 4 weeks, and the discussions that we have with our contacts and with each other has materially changed as well. Not only because of Tesla, but because of Canada and China, and then Geely, at the beginning of the month during CES. So, and if people aren't concerned, or at least really paying attention, then they're not doing their jobs. And that's how I look at it. So anyways, sorry for the technical difficulties, Joe. And I know you're a busy guy because you're getting these phone calls during our call. But for our audience, we're going to have a few great guests over the next few weeks, Joe and I, and we won't tell you who they are just yet, but they're going to be very informative, almost like experts in their fields. Looking forward to those. And then you and I will probably be back in the next couple of weeks with an update for the next episode as well. So everyone, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right.